Commander Marcus Cole stood at the observation window of Earth's largest orbital station. He watched the stars in silence. 3 years ago, humanity had made first contact with alien life. Since then, Marcus had seen things that would make most people lose their minds. He had faced the Galactic Tribunal, where 12 alien species had judged whether humans deserved to exist. He had negotiated peace treaties with beings made of living crystal. He had walked on worlds where the sky burned purple and the rain fell upward, but nothing in his long career had prepared him. For what appeared in the darkness of space that morning, the ship came out of nowhere. One moment, there was empty space. The next moment, a massive vessel hung in the void, like a nightmare made real. It was made of something that looked like black glass, sharp and angular, with edges that seemed to cut the starlight itself. The ship was enormous, easily 10 times the size of Earth's biggest warship. Marcus felt his blood turn cold when he saw the symbol on its hull. Every human who worked in space knew that symbol. It was the mark of the Valkyrie Dominion. The Valkyrie were legends, and not the good kind. They were insectoid creatures, standing 7 feet tall, with bodies covered in exoskeletons that gleamed like polished obsidian. They moved as one, thought as one, a perfect hive mind, with billions of members sharing a single consciousness. In 100 years, they had conquered 12 star systems. They did not make friends. They did not negotiate. They did not ask permission. They took what they wanted, and nobody could stop them. The message came through every communication channel at once. It was simple and direct. The Eternal Queen summons the human called Marcus Cole. He will come alone. He will come now. Within minutes, Marcus was standing in a room full of screaming people. Military generals demanded that he refuse. They said it was obviously a trap. They said the Valkyrie would kill him the moment he stepped aboard their ship. Diplomats begged for more time, saying they needed to analyze the situation, form committees, write reports. Marcus listened to all of them. Then he walked to the airlock. A young officer grabbed his arm. "Sir, you can't do this. We don't know what they want. This is suicide." Marcus gently removed the man's hand. "If I refuse, what do you think happens next?" The room went silent. "They didn't come here to ask nicely," Marcus continued. "If I say no, that ship out there opens fire. Then more ships come. Then Earth burns. We're not ready for a war with the Valkyrie. Nobody is." He looked at the faces around him, seeing their fear, their confusion. "At least this way we might learn something." He walked into the airlock alone. The Valkyrie shuttle was waiting for him. It was small and fast, designed for a single passenger. The inside was dark and cold, with no seats, no windows, no comfort of any kind. Marcus stood in the center of the empty space as the shuttle carried him toward the massive warship. The journey to Valkyrie space took 3 days. Marcus spent most of that time staring at the walls, trying to prepare himself for whatever was coming. The shuttle had no food that humans could eat, but he had packed emergency rations. It had no bed, so he slept on the hard floor. It had no entertainment, so he was alone with his thoughts. His thoughts were not pleasant company. On the second day, the shuttle passed through Valkyrie territory, and Marcus saw something that confused him. The planets below were quiet. Too quiet. Valkyrie worlds were supposed to be busy places, full of ships coming and going, full of activity and industry. But the worlds he saw looked almost empty. Cities stood dark and silent. Spaceports had only a few ships where there should have been hundreds. Something was very wrong. On the third day, the shuttle arrived at the Valkyrie homeworld. It was a massive planet, twice the size of Earth, covered in structures that rose miles into the sky. But even here, Marcus saw the same strange emptiness. The streets far below had only a handful of figures moving through them. The sky, which should have been full of aircraft, held only a few lonely shapes. The shuttle landed in a courtyard made of the same black glass as the ship. Valkyrie guards waited for him, standing perfectly still like statues. They said nothing as Marcus stepped out. They simply turned and began walking, expecting him to follow. He followed. The palace of the Eternal Queen was the largest building Marcus had ever seen. It rose so high that its top disappeared into the clouds. Every surface was covered in carvings that told the history of the Valkyrie people. Thousands of years of conquest and expansion and victory, but the hallways were empty. Their footsteps echoed in spaces that should have been filled with servants and officials and busy workers. Marcus had seen dying civilizations before. He recognized the signs, the silence, the emptiness, the feeling of something great slowly fading away. But how could that be true? The Valkyrie were the most powerful species in the galaxy. They had never lost a war. They had never known defeat. What could possibly be killing them? The throne room was vast beyond imagination. The ceiling was so high that it was lost in darkness. The walls were lined with statues of previous queens, hundreds of them, stretching back into the distant past. And at the far end of the room, on a throne made of something that looked like frozen shadow, sat Queen Cerithix, the Undying. She was the largest Valkyrie Marcus had ever seen. Easily 8 feet tall, with an exoskeleton that seemed to absorb the light around her. Her compound eyes reflected Marcus's image 1,000 times over. She had ruled for 300 years, they said. She had overseen the conquest of 8 star systems. She was old and terrible and powerful beyond measure. Marcus knelt before her, as was proper when meeting royalty. For a long moment, the queen simply looked at him. Then she rose from her throne and walked toward him, her movements slow and heavy, as if every step cost her effort. She stopped just a few feet away, towering over his kneeling form. "Human," she said. Her voice came through the translator device and also through something else. Some kind of chemical communication that Marcus could feel in his bones. "Your species possesses something mine has lost. Something we cannot build. Something we cannot take by force. Something we cannot create in our laboratories." Marcus braced himself. He expected her to demand weapons, or territory, or slaves. He expected threats and ultimatums and the promise of destruction if he refused. Instead, she spoke a single word that made no sense at all. "Stories." Marcus looked up at her, certain that the translator had made a mistake. The queen's compound eyes reflected his confused face 1,000 times. "You will teach us, human," she said. "You will teach my people how to tell stories, or you will watch the Valkyrie disappear from the universe forever." Marcus stayed on his knees, staring up at the massive alien queen. His mind was trying to process what she had just said. Stories. She wanted stories. The most feared species in the entire galaxy, the conquerors of 12 star systems. The nightmare that made other civilizations surrender without fighting. Wanted him to teach them how to tell stories. He had to be misunderstanding something. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "I'm not sure I understand. When you say stories, do you mean historical records? Intelligence reports? Strategic information?" Queen Cerithix made a sound that might have been a sigh. She turned and walked back toward her throne, her heavy steps echoing in the empty hall. "I mean fiction, human. Made-up tales. Narratives about things that never happened and people who never existed." She sat down on her throne, and for the first time, Marcus noticed how tired she looked. Her exoskeleton, which should have gleamed with health, seemed dull and faded. Her movements were slow and careful, like someone who was saving their strength. "Let me tell you a story," she said. "A true one. The only kind my people can tell. 10,000 years ago," she explained, "the Valkyr were different. They were a young species, full of dreams and imagination. They wrote songs and poems. They painted pictures of things that existed only in their minds. They told their children tales of heroes and monsters, of great adventures and impossible loves. But they were also weak. Other species attacked them. Wars nearly destroyed them. So the Valkyrie decided to become strong. They used genetic engineering to improve themselves. They removed everything that seemed unnecessary. Fear was inefficient, so they modified it away. Doubt was wasteful, so they eliminated it. And imagination, they decided, was the most useless thing of all. What good is dreaming about things that are not real? Sirthax asked. What purpose does fiction serve? It is lying for entertainment. It is wasting mental energy on fantasy instead of reality. Our ancestors saw no value in it, so they removed the capacity for it from our genetic code. For thousands of years, this seemed like the right choice. The Valkyrie became perfect warriors, perfect builders, perfect conquerors. They expanded across the stars without stopping. They solved every problem with logic and efficiency. They needed nothing that imagination could provide. Then, 300 years ago, something changed. A Valkyrie scientist discovered a new type of energy that could power ships 100 times faster. But when she presented her findings, nobody could understand them. The math was too strange. The concepts were too unusual. It required thinking about things that did not yet exist, imagining possibilities that had never been real. The Valkyrie couldn't do it. Their perfect logical minds couldn't make the leap. They tried to adapt. They failed. They tried to force themselves to think creatively. They failed again. The ability to imagine, to dream, to create something from nothing was simply gone from their species, and that was only the beginning. Our children began to break, Sirthax said quietly. They hatched healthy and strong, but something was missing inside them. They could function. They could work and fight and follow orders, but they felt nothing. Life had no meaning for them. They did not want anything except for existence to end. The suicide rate among young Valkyrie had increased 3,000% in the last century. Entire hive clusters, populations of millions, had chosen to die rather than continue living in what they called the emptiness. The Valkyrie were not being killed by enemies or disease. They were being killed by the meaninglessness of their own existence. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He had seen civilizations fall before. He had watched species destroy themselves through war, through greed, through stupidity. But he had never heard of a species slowly choosing extinction because life simply wasn't worth living anymore. We studied other species, the Queen continued. We studied you. Humans are so primitive compared to us. You are weak, inefficient, emotional, irrational. You waste enormous amounts of time and energy on things that serve no practical purpose. And yet you thrive. You grow. You adapt. You survive things that should destroy you. She leaned forward on her throne. We finally understood why. It is because you have stories. You create entire universes in your minds. You weep for people who never lived. You find meaning in narratives that have no connection to reality. Somehow, this ability to imagine and create fiction gives your species something that we have lost. Marcus slowly got to his feet. His knees ached from kneeling on the hard floor, but he barely noticed. His mind was racing, trying to understand what he was hearing. You want me to teach your people how to enjoy fiction? He asked. More than that, Sirthax said. We want you to teach us how to create it. How to imagine things that are not real. How to find meaning in stories about people and places that exist only in the mind. Her voice grew heavy with something that sounded almost like despair. We want you to teach us how to dream again. Marcus was silent for a long moment. He thought about the empty cities he had seen. He thought about the quiet streets and the abandoned buildings. He thought about an entire species slowly fading away because they had engineered the ability to hope and dream and imagine out of their own genetic code. And if I cannot, he asked, if this is something that cannot be taught, if your people have truly lost the capacity for imagination forever. The Queen stood up from her throne again. She walked toward him until she was close enough for him to see his own reflection in her compound eyes. Then you go home safely, she said. We do not threaten. We do not force. We have nothing left to force with. She gestured at the empty throne room, at the silent halls beyond, at the dying civilization that surrounded them. We are already ghosts, Commander. We have been ghosts for 100 years. We simply have not stopped moving yet. Marcus looked into her ancient eyes and saw something he had never expected to see in a Valkyrie. He saw fear. He saw sadness. He saw the desperate hope of someone who had tried everything else and was now asking a stranger for help. He should have been afraid. He should have been suspicious. This could still be a trap, a trick. some kind of manipulation he did not understand, but instead he felt something unexpected. He felt pity. And he felt something else too, something that surprised him even more. He felt challenged, teaching an alien species how to imagine. Teaching creatures who had removed creativity from their own DNA how to dream again. It was impossible. It was ridiculous. It was the strangest mission anyone had ever been given. It was exactly the kind of impossible challenge that humans were best at. "I will try," Marcus said. "I cannot promise success. I do not even know if success is possible, but I will try." Queen Cerithax looked at him for a long time. Then she made a gesture that might have been a bow, a sign of respect from the ruler of an empire to a single human standing in her throne room. "That is all we ask," she said. "That is more than anyone else has given us in 300 years. The months that followed were the most difficult of Marcus Cole's entire life. He had faced alien tribunals, negotiated with hostile empires, survived situations that should have killed him a dozen times. But nothing had prepared him for the simple, maddening frustration of trying to teach imagination to beings who had none. The Queen gave him everything he asked for: a teaching space in the palace, filled with screens and projectors, translation equipment that could convert human media into Velkhari language, access to students, dozens of them, all eager to learn what he had to teach. They were perfect students in the worst possible way. Marcus started with the basics. He explained what a story was. He talked about characters and plots and conflicts. He drew diagrams of story structure, showing how tales move from beginning to middle to end. He explained the concept of heroes and villains, of challenges and victories. The Velkhari listened carefully. They took notes. They memorized everything he said. They could repeat his lessons word for word. They could analyze any story he showed them and break it down into its component parts, but they could not feel it. He showed them human films. They watched with their compound eyes focused on the screen, taking in every detail. When the movie ended, they would tell him exactly what had happened, scene by scene. They would note every plot hole and logical inconsistency. They would point out moments where characters made decisions that did not make sense. They never laughed at the jokes. They never gasped at the surprises. They never felt sad when characters died. Marcus tried Shakespeare. He read them Romeo and Juliet, explaining the tragedy of two young lovers destroyed by their family's hatred. The Velkhari listened carefully. When he finished, one of them raised a hand. "The probability of these two individuals meeting in this way is extremely low," the student said. "And their decision to die rather than live apart is not logical. Death eliminates all future possibilities, while life preserves at least some options." This story is poorly constructed. Marcus tried music. He played them symphonies and songs, trying to help them understand how sound could carry emotion. They analyzed the frequencies and patterns. They noted the mathematical relationships between notes. They understood the technical aspects perfectly. They felt nothing. After 3 months of failure, Marcus sat alone in his quarters, staring at the wall. He had tried everything he could think of. Nothing worked. The Velkhari understood stories the way a computer understands language, processing the information without any real comprehension of what it meant. Maybe the Queen was right. Maybe her species had truly lost something that could never be recovered. Maybe you could not teach imagination to beings who had engineered it out of themselves 10,000 years ago. He started writing his resignation. He would tell the Queen that he had failed, that he was sorry, that there was nothing more he could do. He would go home to Earth and live with the knowledge that he had been given an impossible task and had not completed it. Then he noticed he was being watched. A young Velkhari stood in the doorway of his quarters. She was small by their standards, barely 6 feet tall, with an exoskeleton that still had the soft sheen of youth. Unlike the older Velkhari, who moved with mechanical precision, there was something almost hesitant about her posture. Her name, Marcus had learned, was Kithra. She was barely mature by Velkhari standards, one of the youngest in his teaching group. She rarely spoke during lessons, but she was always there, watching from the back of the room. "I am disturbing you," she said. "I will leave," no, Marcus said. setting aside his resignation letter. "Please, come in. Is there something you need?" Kithra entered slowly, her compound eyes scanning the room. She looked at the human decorations Marcus had put up, pictures from Earth, photographs of places and people he missed. She seemed fascinated by them in a way that was different from how other Valkyrie looked at things. "I have been observing your lessons," she said. "But I have also been observing you." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Observing me? When you show us stories, I watch your face instead of the screen," Kithra said. "I see changes in your expression. I see water come from your eyes sometimes. I see your breathing change, your muscles tense and relax." Marcus waited, not sure where this was going. "Today you showed us a story about a small creature called a hobbit," Kithra continued. "At the end, when the hobbit said goodbye to his friends, water came from your eyes. Why?" Marcus thought about how to answer. He could explain the biology of tears, the physical process that caused humans to cry. But that was not what she was asking, because it was sad. He said simply. Frodo had saved the world, but he was too damaged by his journey to enjoy it. He had to leave everyone he loved and go somewhere he could never return from. Even though it was the right thing to do, it still hurt to watch. Kithra's antennae moved in a way Marcus had never seen before. But Frodo is not real. He never existed. His pain is not actual pain, Marcus agreed. But the feeling is real. When I watch Frodo suffer, I feel something in my own heart. Not because I believe he is real, but because I recognize the truth in his experience. I have felt loss. I have felt sacrifice. I have felt the pain of leaving people I love. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. Stories are not lies about things that never happened, Kithra. Stories are practice. They let us feel things safely, so we know what to do when real pain comes. They let us experience 1,000 lives without leaving our own. They connect us to every other being who has ever felt what the characters feel. Kithra was silent for a long moment. Her antennae continued to move in that strange new pattern. I do not understand, she finally said, but I want to understand. The others listen to your lessons, but they hear only information. I watch you and I see something more. Something I do not have words for. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Hope, maybe? Or at least the beginning of it. What do you want to know? He asked. Kithra looked at him with her 1,000-faceted eyes. I want to know why the hobbit's goodbye made water come from your eyes. Not the explanation. The real reason. The one that comes from inside you. Marcus thought about Frodo. He thought about sacrifice and loss and saying goodbye to things you love. And then, without planning to, he found himself thinking about something else entirely. I had a daughter, he said quietly. Her name was Emma. She died 5 years ago in an accident on the Mars colony. She was 7 years old. Kithra went very still. Every night I used to read her a story before she went to sleep. Her favorite was a book about a toy rabbit that became real because a little boy loved it so much. After she died, I could not look at that book for 3 years. It hurt too much. Marcus felt the old grief rising in his chest, but he did not push it away. When I finally read it again, I cried for an hour. Not because the story was sad, but because my daughter had loved it. Sharing that story with her had created something between us, a connection that death could not completely break. And when I read it again, I felt her with me, just for a moment. He looked at Kithra. That is why stories matter. Not because they are true, but because they help us feel things that are true. They help us connect to each other and to ourselves, and to everyone who has ever loved or lost or hoped or dreamed. Kithra and Antony were moving faster now, in a pattern Marcus had never seen any Valkyrie make. Will you read it to me? She asked. The story about the rabbit. Not as a lesson. Just read it to me, the way you read it to your daughter. Marcus felt his throat tighten. He nodded. Yes, he said. I think I would like that very much. Marcus found his old copy of the Velveteen Rabbit stored in his personal belongings. He had brought it with him without really knowing why. Maybe some part of him had known he would need it. He and Kithra sat together in his quarters. The young Valkyrie perched awkwardly on a chair designed for human bodies. Marcus held the worn book in his hands, feeling its familiar weight. The cover was faded and creased from years of use. Some of the pages had small tears from being turned by small, eager fingers. "This book is damaged," Kithra observed. "You should obtain a new copy." Marcus smiled. "The damage is part of what makes it valuable. Every mark, every worn spot is a memory. My daughter made these marks. This book remembers her in a way." Kithra's antennae twitched. She did not understand. But she did not argue. Marcus began to read. He did not read the way he had read to his students, explaining every passage, analyzing every theme. He read the way he had read to Emma, letting his voice rise and fall with the emotions of the story. He read slowly, giving each word time to breathe. The story was simple. A stuffed rabbit was given to a little boy for Christmas. At first, the boy did not care much about the rabbit, but over time, as they played together and slept together and shared adventures together, the rabbit became the boy's most treasured possession. The boy loved the rabbit so much that, according to the magic of the nursery, the rabbit became real. Marcus watched Kithra as he read. At first, she simply listened, taking in the words like data. But as the story continued, something began to change. Her rigid posture softened slightly. Her antennae moved in strange patterns that Marcus had never seen before. Her compound eyes seemed to focus differently, not analyzing but simply experiencing. When he reached the part where the rabbit was thrown away, declared too old and worn and dirty to keep, Kithra made a small sound. It was almost too quiet to hear, a tiny vibration in her throat. Marcus kept reading. He told her about the rabbit sitting in the garbage, alone and forgotten, remembering all the love it had shared with the boy. He told her about the nursery magic that came to save the rabbit, transforming it from a worn-out toy into a real rabbit that could run and jump and live. He reached the final scene, where the real rabbit returned to the garden, where it had once played with the boy. The boy saw the rabbit but did not recognize it. He did not know that this was his old friend, now alive and free. The rabbit looked at the boy one last time, remembering everything they had shared, and then hopped away into the forest to begin its new life. When Marcus finished reading, the room was silent. He looked at Kithra and felt his heart stop. She was crying. It was not like human crying. No tears fell from her compound eyes, but she was making a sound, a high keening note that rose and fell like a song of grief. Her whole body trembled with it. Her antennae moved in wild, uncontrolled patterns. Kithra, Marcus said gently, "What is happening? What are you feeling?" "I do not know," she said, and her voice shook. "I do not have words for it." The rabbit loved the boy. The boy loved the rabbit, but they could never be together again, even though they both wanted to be. Even though they still remembered, even though the love was still there. She looked at Marcus with her thousand-faceted eyes. "Why does that hurt?" "The rabbit is not real. The boy is not real. But something inside me hurts anyway." "How is that possible?" Marcus set the book aside and knelt in front of her. "That is called empathy," he said. "That is what stories do. They let us feel what others feel, even if those others never existed. They connect us to experiences we have never had." "But why?" Kithra asked. "What is the purpose? What survival value does this pain have?" "It teaches us compassion," Marcus said. "When we feel the rabbit's loneliness, we understand what it means to be abandoned. When we feel the boy's loss, we understand what it means to forget something precious. These feelings make us better at understanding each other. They make us kinder." He paused, thinking of Emma, of all the stories they had shared. "And they make us less alone. When you feel what the rabbit feels, you join the billions of other beings who have felt the same thing. You become part of something larger than yourself." Kithra was still trembling, but the keening sound had softened. She looked at Marcus with something new in her eyes, something that had not been there before. "I want to feel this again," she said. "I want to learn how to feel everything the stories can teach me. Will you show me?" Before Marcus could answer, the door to his quarters burst open. A Valkyrie guard stood there, his posture rigid with alarm. "The queen demands your presence," the guard said. both of you, immediately." They followed the guard through the empty halls of the palace. Word had already spread through the hive mind, Marcus realized. Every Valkyrie in the Empire knew what had happened. For the first time in thousands of years, one of their kind had felt emotion from a story. The throne room was different when they arrived. It was full of Valkyrie, hundreds of them, filling the vast space. They stood in perfect silence, their compound eyes all focused on Kithra as she walked toward the throne. Queen Sirithax rose from her seat. Her ancient body moved slowly, but there was something new in her posture, something that looked almost like hope. "Show me," the queen said. "Show me what you felt." Kithra stood before her ruler, small and young and trembling. She closed her eyes, remembering the story, and then she made the sound again. That high, keening note of grief and love and loss, rising from her throat like a song that had been waiting 10,000 years to be sung. The effect on the assembled Valkyrie was immediate. They shifted and murmured, their antennae moving in agitation. Some of them stepped back, as if afraid of being infected. Others leaned forward, drawn by something they did not understand. When the sound faded, the queen was silent for a long moment. She finally asked, turning to Marcus, "How did you do this? We have been trying to restore imagination to our people for 300 years. How did you succeed in a few months?" Marcus shook his head. "I did not succeed. Failed. All my lessons, all my teaching methods, none of them worked." He looked at Kithra, who was still trembling but standing tall. "What worked was not teaching," he said. "What worked was sharing. I did not explain the story to her. I did not analyze it or break it into parts. I simply shared something that mattered to me, something connected to real pain and real love in my own life. And somehow, she felt it too." The queen considered this. "You are saying that stories cannot be taught. They must be felt." "I am saying that stories are not information," Marcus said. "They are connections. When I read that book to Kithra, I was not giving her data. I was opening my heart and letting her see what was inside. The story was just the bridge between us." He stepped forward, his mind racing with a new idea. "Your Majesty, your people have been trying to learn stories like they learn everything else, through analysis and memorization. But that is not how stories work. You cannot understand music by studying sound waves. You cannot understand love by analyzing brain chemistry. Some things can only be learned by experiencing them alongside someone else." He looked out at the assembled Valkyrie, all those silent figures waiting to hear what he would say. What if every Valkyrie was paired with a human? Not as a teacher and student, but as friends. The human would share the stories that matter most to them, the ones connected to real experiences and real emotions. And maybe, like Kithra, your people would begin to feel what we feel." Queen Sirithax stared at him. "You are asking us to be vulnerable, to open ourselves to strangers, to admit that we need help from a species we once considered primitive," I guess Marcus said simply. "I am asking you to be human for a little while. It is terrifying and painful and confusing. But it is also the only way I know to feel alive." The queen was silent for a very long time. The entire throne room waited, motionless, for her decision. Finally, she turned to Kithra. "Little one, was it worth it? The pain you felt from the story? Would you choose to feel it again if you could go back?" Kithra looked at her queen without fear. "I would choose it 1,000 times," she said. "For those few moments, I was not empty. I was full of something I cannot name. I would trade everything I am to feel that way forever." The queen nodded slowly. Then she looked at Marcus with her ancient compound eyes. "Psst, make your plan, human. Call your people. We will try this thing you suggest." She sat back on her throne, and for the first time, Marcus saw something that might have been a smile on her alien face. "Teach us to dream again." 5 years had passed since Marcus Cole first knelt before Queen Sirithax in her empty throne room. 5 years since a young Valkyrie named Kithra had heard a story about a velveteen rabbit and learned how to cry. 5 years that had changed the galaxy in ways no one could have predicted. The human Valkyrie narrative exchange, as it came to be called, had grown beyond anything Marcus had imagined. Thousands of humans had volunteered to travel to Valkyrie space, not as diplomats or soldiers, but as friends. They came from every corner of Earth and its colonies. Teachers and factory workers, grandparents and teenagers, veterans who had seen too much war, and artists who had spent their lives creating beauty. Each one carried with them the stories that had shaped their lives. They were paired with Valkyrie partners. One human for every 10,000 members of the hive mind. The humans were called story sharers. They were given a simple mission: make a friend and tell them what matters to you. At first, progress was slow. Many Valkyrie could not learn to feel, no matter how hard they tried. Generations of genetic engineering had removed something essential from their brains, something that could not be restored. These Valkyrie continued to exist in their quiet emptiness, unable to join the awakening that was spreading through their species. But the young ones, like Kithra, were different. They had not lived as long in the emptiness. Their minds were still flexible, still capable of growth. And when they were paired with humans who genuinely cared about them, who shared their stories not as lessons but as gifts, something began to change. The first Valkyrie laugh was recorded 8 months after the program began. A young drone named Vextel was listening to his human partner tell a joke about a man walking into a bar. The joke was not particularly funny, but something about the way the human told it. The joy in his voice, the sparkle in his eyes, triggered something in Vextel's brain. He made a sound that no Valkyrie had made in 10,000 years. A bubbling series of clicks that was unmistakably laughter. After that, the changes came faster. Valkyrie began to experience humor, to find pleasure in absurdity and surprise. They began to feel suspense, that delicious tension of not knowing what would happen next. They began to feel hope, that irrational belief that things could be better than they were, and they began to create. The first Valkyrie story was written by Kithra herself. 2 years into the program, it was called The Human Who Taught Us to Weep, and it told the tale of an alien visitor who came to a dying world and showed its people how to feel again. The story was clumsy by human standards. The pacing was uneven, the dialogue was stiff, and the ending explained its themes too directly instead of letting readers discover them on their own. But it was a story, a real story, created from nothing by a mind that had been designed to be incapable of imagination. Kithra had reached into the void inside herself and pulled out something new, something that had never existed before. When the book was released, it sold more copies than any text in Valkyrie history. Millions of readers experienced that high, keening cry of emotion for the first time. Many of them did not understand what they were feeling. Many of them were frightened by the intensity of their own responses. But they kept reading anyway, hungry for more. Other Valkyrie writers followed Kithra's example. They wrote stories about their own experiences, about the emptiness they had lived in, and the awakening they were undergoing. They wrote stories about their ancestors, imagining what life might have been like before creativity was engineered away. They wrote stories about the future, dreaming of what their species might become. The stories were not perfect. They were strange and awkward and sometimes hard for humans to understand, but they were alive. They carried emotion and meaning and connection. They were proof that the Valkyrie were learning to dream. Again, Marcus watched all of this happen with a mixture of pride and wonder. He had come to the Valkyrie homeworld expecting to fail. Instead, he had helped spark a revolution of the soul. On the 5th anniversary of the program, Queen Cirithak summoned him to the throne room one final time. But the room was different now. It was no longer empty and silent. Thousands of Valkyrie filled the space, along with hundreds of humans. They stood together, the two species that had once been strangers. Now joined by something stronger than treaties or trade agreements, the queen herself looked different too. Her exoskeleton, once dull and faded, now gleamed with health. Her movements were stronger, more vital. She was still ancient, still carrying the weight of 300 years of leadership, but there was something new in her bearing. Something that looked almost like joy. She rose from her throne as Marcus approached. Around them, the crowd fell silent. "Commander Cole," she said, and her voice was warm in a way it had never been before. "When I summoned you 5 years ago, I asked you to save my species. I asked you to teach us how to tell stories, how to dream, how to imagine. She paused, her compound eyes reflecting the thousands of faces watching them. I was wrong about what we needed. You did not teach us stories. You gave us something far greater. You gave us meaning. Aquace felt his throat tighten. He thought about all the story sharers who had come to this distant world, all the friendships that had been formed, all the walls that had been broken down between two very different kinds of minds. It gave us the ability to connect, the Queen continued, not just to each other, but to all living beings. When we read your stories, we feel what you feel. We understand your joys and sorrows, your hopes and fears. We are no longer alone in the universe. She stepped down from her throne and stood before Marcus, her massive form towering over his small human body. But there was no threat in her posture, no dominance. She stood before him as an equal, as a friend. For 10,000 years we were perfect, she said. We were efficient and logical and powerful beyond measure. But we were empty. We had removed everything that made life worth living, and we did not even know what we had lost. She reached out with one of her massive hands and placed it gently on Marcus's shoulder. The gesture was awkward, clearly borrowed from human custom, but it was sincere. You showed us that perfection is not the goal. Connection is the goal. Meaning is the goal. Stories are how conscious beings reach across the void between minds and say, "You are not alone. You are not forgotten. Your existence matters." Marcus looked up at the ancient queen, and he felt tears forming in his eyes. Not tears of sadness, but tears of something else. Gratitude, maybe, or hope, or simple human joy at being part of something beautiful. "I did not give you anything, Your Majesty," he said quietly. "I just reminded you what you had forgotten." He turned and looked out at the crowd, at all those humans and Valkyries standing together. He saw Kithra in the front row, no longer a scared young drone, but a celebrated writer and speaker. He saw human story sharers standing beside their Valkyrie partners, the bonds between them visible in every gesture and glance. Every species that looks up at the stars and wonders what if has stories inside them, Marcus said. Humans did not invent imagination. We just happen to have kept ours alive. All we did was help you find yours again. The Queen nodded slowly. Then she turned to face the assembled crowd, her voice rising to fill the vast throne room. "Let this day be remembered," she declared. "Not as the day the Valkyrie were saved, but as the day we learned what it truly means to be alive. We are no longer perfect. We are something better. We are dreamers. We are storytellers. We are connected to every being who has ever loved or lost or hoped or feared." She raised her arms, and the crowd erupted in sound. Valkyrie keening and human cheering mixed together, filling the air with a noise that had never been heard before in all the history of the galaxy. Two species, once separated by everything, now joined by the simple magic of stories shared. Marcus Cole stood in the middle of it all. It's an ordinary human who had done an extraordinary thing. He thought about his daughter Emma, about all the nights they had spent reading together, about the rabbit that became real because a little boy loved it. Some things never really die, he realized. Stories carry them forward. Love carries them forward. Connection carries them forward. He closed his eyes and smiled. The Valkyrie had learned to dream again, and in doing so, they had reminded humanity of something important too. Stories were not just entertainment. They were not just escape. They were the bridges between souls, the threads that wove all conscious beings together into something greater than themselves. They were what made life worth living, and as long as there were stories to tell and hearts to share them, no species would ever truly be alone in the vast darkness of space.